Joining me now is one of the finest thinkers of his generation, the author of international bestsellers, including The Madness of Crowds, The Strange Death of Europe and the War on the West, Douglas Murray. Douglas, really good to see you again. Thanks so much for joining me on the show. I want to start with Donald Trump's issue. He's warning to federal employees that if you don't return to work by February 6, you'll be fired. This is what he said.
As everyone knows, most of the time they're not working, they're not very productive, and it's unfair to the millions of people in the United States who are in fact working hard from job sites and not from their home. As federal employees, they must meet a high standard. They're representing our government, they're representing our country. If they don't agree by February 6th to show up back to work in their office, they will be terminated.
He's offering buyouts to those who opt to leave their jobs with 7 months' pay. Douglas, this president is not mucking around. How critical is it to have federal workers actually back at work and actually doing work?
Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, in America, like in Britain, and I'm sure Australia, the last residue of people who pretend to be really terrified of COVID are federal employees and civil servants and the like. Many of them seem still to have an extraordinary fear of the coronavirus or something like that, because otherwise, why are they not at their desks? Most people had to return to work after the pandemic, but it's amazing how federal workers, civil servants and others almost get these sort of cushy deals where at best their work week was sort of flipped around, where you had a couple of days sometimes in the office and then 5 days in the garden at home to recuperate from it. I think that we all know that this is one of the great boondoggles of all time. It's high time that federal workers did return to the office. And it's quite right to say, if you're not going to show up to work, then guess what? You don't work here anymore.
I agree. In the end, you've got to foster a good environment. You can't do that when you've got half of the workforce still at home doing goodness knows what. Now, let's talk about Donald Trump's one flag directive, whereby only the United States of America flag is authorised to be flown or displayed at US facilities, both domestic and abroad, and in US government content. Douglas, I've got to say it's bizarre it took an executive order to get here, but it is the sign of the times we're in. In your view, what does this directive represent and how will it help unite America?
Yes, I wrote about this in my column in the New York Post the other day because it's so interesting, as you say, that it would need a directive from the president to correct this. In recent years, and particularly since 2020, there's been a massive upsurge of people everywhere flying a whole array of flags. And sure, I mean, anyone can fly whatever flag they want, but federal buildings, government buildings, that's a different thing. And particularly since 2020, federal buildings, embassies abroad and much more have not been prioritizing the flag of the United States of America. They very often decided that it's time to fly some other interest flag. The BLM flag made quite a few appearances, a whole range of others, most prominently, of course, the so-called Pride flag, which, as I said in my piece, went from being a sort of perfectly okay rainbow design some years ago to being, of course, this very ugly thing with a triangle and a circle in the middle, and also stripes to represent black and other minority people, on the weird presumption that if you added a black stripe to the Pride flag, you would have black people represented. And as I mentioned in the piece, who exactly did these people think were represented by the yellow stripe or the bright red stripe or the blue stripe in the original Pride flag? Nobody really knew what any of this was about. It all just got, this social contagion got going. And before you knew it, this flag celebrating, for instance, the right of people to not care about sex, which was one of the bits that was added, which was the asexual bit of the flag, that suddenly became an enormous priority, asexual pride. And American embassies were flying this very ugly a new flag from their buildings. And of course, all of that stuff, as you know, and many people viewing know, is just divisive nonsense. I mean, the United States of America, the flag is meant to unite people. It's not meant to be that a nation has to subvert its national identity to whatever gender or race identities. Everyone's meant to come under the unity of the one flag of the country. It's a great unifying message. And yeah, there have been a lot of radical activists who've come along in recent years who said, no, everyone needs their own flag, a special flag for every person. And it's quite right, I think, that Trump has said, no, actually, we swear allegiance to the flag and it's one flag. And nobody's rights are infringed or anything like that. It just means that federal buildings and embassies abroad are going to be flying the flag of the United States of America, which is what it should have been all along.
Absolutely. As I said, I mean, it's extraordinary. It took an executive order just to get to that. It's such a simple concept when you think about it, really. Now, in the last week, the ICE task force has done incredible work across America, arresting hundreds of illegal migrants. And now Donald Trump has signed the Laken Riley Act into law, requiring law enforcement to detain illegal aliens who commit theft and violent crimes. Have a look.
I'm going to sign this in honor of Laken Riley. Come on up here, some of the people that we love that have been so instrumental. Okay?
Douglas, Donald Trump is setting the pace for the world on how to crack down on migration. You're from the UK, where migration is out of control. What can UK Labor learn from Donald Trump?
My suspicion is that UK Labour are going to learn very little from anyone. It's one of their problems. But yes, I wish they would take some notice of what is happening in allied countries for the better and for the worse. But what Trump did there is very, very interesting. The Laken Riley Act is named after a young American woman who was brutally murdered by an illegal migrant to the UK with many previous convictions. And even the symbolism of that is very important, because the people objecting to the forcible deportation of migrants think that they're sort of burnishing their liberal credentials. There are officials, Democrats, of course, who in recent days have been opposing ICE moving in and getting career criminals out of the US who shouldn't be there anyway. But it's one thing to sort of pretend that it's all just about the rights of the illegal migrant. But Trump is reminding people, and there's actually American citizens of all backgrounds have the right to also be thought of as well, to be able to live in neighborhoods that are as safe as they can be. And for that to happen, the federal government has to take a view about career criminals breaking into America and staying there. And that's what he's done. And as I say, it's not just about actually cracking down on the illegals. It's about saying, this is not just about them. It's about the nation as a whole. It's about the citizenry of the nation. So I think the symbolism of that is very important. Whether any other developed country learns from that, we'll see.
Well, what do you make of the left in the United States having a meltdown over these deportations? Donald Trump has wasted no time, yet the left, they're crying, they're upset, they're saying, no, these people need a home to live. What do you make of the response?
I mean, I think these people really need to take a serious look, not just at themselves, but at the actual situation. I would have thought that I'm not a leftist, but there are decent arguments of the left on all sorts of policies, okay? But if I was a leftist and I wanted to pursue leftist policies and get other people onto my side, I don't think I'd make a priority of saying, please don't deport the killers and muggers and robbers and rapists who have entered the United States illegally. Please don't come after them and take them out of our area. I'd have thought that any leftist, like anyone else, would say, any Democrat, like any Republican, would say, there are undesirable people who've moved into our neighborhood and we don't want them here. And it's astonishing to me that there are people on the American left who don't realize the strategic mistake they keep on making. They lost the election last November, in part because they were seen as a party to be representing the minorities of the minorities. It's one thing to stand up for minority rights. It's another thing entirely, rather, to put minority rights over majority rights. To pretend that, for instance, a man who's decided he wants to become a woman has more rights or should be more focused on and given more of a megaphone than anyone else in society. Or to think that you should pitch your tent on the idea of defending career criminals who've broken into your country and committed crimes whilst there. Why would a left that wants to get re-elected keep tying itself to causes like that? They've got to try to appeal to the majority. And the majority of people want to live in safe neighborhoods and see the laws of their land respected, including the immigration laws. So, it's a recipe for staying out of power. These San Francisco officials and others who have decided the most important right to defend in the United States is the right to break into the US and commit crimes and stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the majority voted for Donald Trump's mandate to deport these people. So the left just need to get on with it. Now, we mentioned the UK before, but now out of control immigration means that Britain's population is now bigger than France's. And new figures show 10 million more people are due to arrive within a decade. That'll take it to 72.5 million people by 2032. Douglas, look, this is extraordinary. Where is the UK going to house all these people? Where are the plans?
There are no plans. They're not going to be able to house them. The whole thing will break down. I can say that with absolute certainty. When net legal migration, was at about 300,000 a year 10 years ago in the UK, the Conservative government, the nominally Conservative government, said that they had a house building target of about 300,000 houses a year because there was a housing shortfall. That's brilliant. And of course, you don't have to be a maths genius to know that even if they did make that target of house building, which they never made, all that would happen would be that you'd keep on concreting over the countryside in order to put up houses for people from the rest of the world. Now, they failed at every one of the targets they had when migration was in the realm of about 300,000. And when you had net migration recently at almost 1 million a year into the UK, there just are no houses. And it seems to me, as far as I can see, that to the extent that there's any long-term plan of the political class in the UK, it's that migration should continue, legal and illegal migration should continue at historic highs for as long as possible, and that the great future that Britain can look forward to is all of our green places being concreted over for very shabby, shoddy, ill-built houses to be thrown up, and then we can all remind ourselves how proud we are to be British. It's not my dream for the future of my country of birth. I don't think it's the dream of many British people either. Obviously, the people will have to speak at some point through the ballot box. But the problem in Britain is that every time they speak, their elected representatives ignore them. So it's enough to make one feel pretty pessimistic about the future of the country, I have to say.
Yeah, which is such a shame, but those figures are out of control. Now, before we let you go, Douglas, you have a new book coming out soon on democracies and death cults, releasing April 8. Tell us about it.
Yes, it's going to be out on April the 8th, available in the US, the UK, Australia, everywhere. If you can find a bookshop these days, you can get it in a bookshop. But if you can't, of course, you can order it online through all the usual routes. It's really the result of a lot of reporting and reflecting I've been able to do in recent years, particularly from reporting from the front lines of the conflicts in the Middle East, but also really focusing on what I regard as being that crucial question, which is what has gone wrong in countries like Australia, Britain, America, Europe, where we see particularly a younger generation coming up who seem not to be able to tell the difference between what I call democracies and death cults, between civilized, liberal-minded societies like ours and death cults who literally want us dead, why has there been such an inability to realize that difference? And why has there been not one anti-Hamas protest of any size on the streets of Melbourne or Sydney, but every week, you can find the anti-Israel loons out on the streets screaming about a conflict in a far-off continent about which they know nothing. I think there's a lot that this tells us about Israel, but there's an awful lot it tells us about the rest of us too. So I hope everyone will pre-order it.
Absolutely. On Democracies and Death Cults, releasing April 8, not to be missed. Douglas Murray, always wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this evening.
Great to see you again.